So when we look at the future prices of graphite and where they're going to go, what's going to happen? Well, we certainly think it's going to go much higher than it is right now. And again, I'll use the lithium market as something of an analogy in that the market grew faster than the ability of the upstream to meet the demand. And we're seeing exactly the same thing happening in graphite right now.
David, it's always a pleasure. Welcome back to the channel.
Yeah, thanks. It's really good to be here.
Fantastic. There's a lot to unpack, obviously talking about that pathway to production, but maybe a quick refresher for those not familiar with Renascor Resources. Who are you and really what role do you want to play in the supply chain?
Yeah, thanks. So we are planning a vertically integrated project that combines one of the world's largest graphite resources located here in Australia with a downstream development to produce not just a product at the mine site, but to go one step further and produce purified spherical graphite that we can sell directly to the lithium-ion battery sector.
For sure. And we all know about graphite's role as a critical mineral. It's being defined as such by many governments around the world. Can you talk about why it's so important, but also what are some of those changing trends that you're seeing emerging over this past period?
Yeah, so graphite is the key component in lithium-ion battery anodes, and there's a synthetic or a natural kind, but there's no substitute for graphite itself. And so, as we build more mega factories to produce batteries, we need more anodes, and hence we need more graphite. And what we're seeing is really the gigafactories keep on being built. The anode manufacturing capacity is there to build it, but there's a real supply gap in producing the graphite or either in its concentrate or intermediate purified spherical graphite form. And that's the market that we're really focused on, that we see as the potential to really expand in the coming months. And we've seen it already happen in lithium, and the signs are really pointing for the same sort of thing happening in graphite as well.
That was something that I was interested to ask. We've obviously seen the attention on lithium. I think everyone's familiar with it. What do you think is really needed to see that transition in terms of mindset from investors, from funds, and from the broader society to happen in the graphite market?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's happening already because we're seeing increased demand where it starts, for instance, with the Chinese starting to import more graphite for their own supply of anodes, and that puts pressure on the system. And now the limited number of existing anode manufacturers outside of China are feeling increasing pressure on supply. They're dependent on the Chinese for the intermediate supply of purified spherical graphite. The Chinese can't feed their own industry. So we're already starting to see that happen already. We're already seeing the pressure from a price perspective. Over the last few months, things have been mooted a bit by the downward equity trend where the overall macroeconomic picture is changing risk appetite. At the same time, however, anode build is only increasing. And what that means for companies like us is the product is really an increasing need. And what we've seen from all the battery minerals and the battery sector in general is it's proved quite resilient to whether it's pandemic or war, and now these recessionary concerns. It seems to be moving forward, and we're certainly seeing that. And so I think there's every expectation that growth it's not that we're waiting for it to happen. It is happening right now.
For sure, yeah. We've seen that resilience really coming through across many of the different resources in the battery material space. That obviously leads us to Siviour. You've got a massive resource on hand. You're fresh off the back of a resource upgrade as well. I think it's now the second largest proven graphite resource in the world and further potential drilling. Did you want to just talk about some of the numbers surrounding it and why I think Siviour really does stand out as that resource?
Yeah, look, in terms of scale, it's probably one of a half dozen or so deposits around the world that has the potential to offer significant graphite resources at relatively low cost. The real advantage of Siviour is not just in its scale, but in its geological orientation. It's a flat-lying ore body. It's near surface. That means we can get a relatively low mining cost. And so when we completed our definitive feasibility study in 2019, it told us we could produce a graphite concentrate at the mine site at amongst the lowest cost of any graphite development globally. But then on top of that, I guess the difference we see is that because we're in South Australia, so a low sovereign risk, high regulatory environment, that's the kind of environment where you want to go downstream, especially in the battery sector, that's becoming increasingly reliant on high ESG standards. And so we really see ourselves as being one of amongst the best graphite deposits. But the fact that we're in South Australia means we can go one step further downstream, and we can leverage off that cost advantage at the mine site and take it to the downstream and produce purified spherical graphite for an industry that's going at 25-30% per annum. And we see ourselves as having the potential to become a real low-cost leader, certainly outside of China. And that gives us the potential to grow Siviour into one of, if not the largest graphite developments globally.
For sure. And then I guess just to paint that context in terms of where we're currently positioned, obviously looking with your eyes towards the FID, there's a few milestones that you want to achieve before there. Can you just lay out the pathway to get towards that final investment decision?
Yeah, so we have probably a couple of very busy months coming ahead of us now, with a number of key news items that we're expecting to come up in the very short term. One of the key ones is going to be our downstream site selection. We'll be putting our downstream site. We're in final negotiations, we believe, on that right now. We expect to release that soon. We're also hoping very soon to get our final mining approval, our PEPA, for the upstream site. Now, one of the advantages, of course, of being in a low sovereign risk jurisdiction is it works great for ESG credentials, but it also means you have to go through a relatively long approvals pathway, and we believe we're very close to the end of that. We've submitted all our responses to the South Australian Department of Energy and Mining, and we're also expecting that approval soon. We're working on an updated battery anode material study that builds on previous feasibility work and integrates the production at the mine site with the downstream. And also, I guess one of the keys to that is in this updated study, we have the advantage of looking at some of the current demand. When we did that earlier study, we were looking at producing 28,000 tons of purified spherical graphite. And it really seemed like a bit of a stretch goal. We thought that the market would go in that direction, but it has not only gone in that direction, it's really exceeded it. We already have non-binding MOUs that we've publicly announced for up to 60,000 tons of material, up to 30,000 of that to one customer, POSCO. So as part of this battery anode material study that we're doing right now, we're looking at expanding that production. At the same time, we're working with our offtake partners, and we're hopefully going to be able to announce the binding offtake agreements where we're into discussions on key terms, including price. And based on where we see this market going, we think that there's every expectation that our shareholders are going to be able to benefit from what we think is going to be some real upward movement in the price as we push through into the coming years. And then on the finance side, we were fortunate enough to be granted a conditional loan by the Australian government under their $2 billion critical minerals facility. So we're looking to unlock that as well. That'll provide a key part of the financing. And as I think as many of us in the battery mineral sector go, one of the key difficulties for projects has been trying to get support on the financing side. And we're very, I guess, fortunate to have the support of the Australian government, because that's a key component of what we need to do. And then finally, if we're successful with all these things, we'd be looking to make a final investment decision and really get cracking on constructing what we think is going to be a really exciting project.
Plenty going on there, but it also looks like it's really getting to that pointy end, which is exciting now. As these dominoes start to fall in place, and if that FID does go through, what's that timeline to construction and then potentially production moving forward?
Yeah, so what we want to do is we want to complete the bulk of the technical work this year and be in a position to get the final investment decision next year, then commence construction, and then hopefully by sometime in 2024, we'd be able to be producing product. Obviously, that's dependent on a number of factors, including completing our technical work, getting regulatory approvals, getting final agreement on offtake, and then finance. But we think that's a reasonable expectation. And as we move forward in the coming months and we get some of these regulatory approvals, we finish our study, we'll probably be releasing more definitive guidelines on when exactly we see this thing setting out.
You've talked about the customers there. Obviously, you've got a significant amount of non-binding offtake already. It'll be fascinating to see some of those convert to binding. Is there the potential as well of new offtakers coming in, or are you just focusing on the current crop that you've got?
Oh, absolutely, on new ones as well. So we have non-binding agreements right now, so we're in discussions with our non-binding partners about converting those to binding. But at the same time, we're seeing increasing demand as well. I'll just flag, we're obviously in discussions with POSCO, who are the largest buyer outside of China. We have an agreement with Hanwha Corporation, who are a Japanese trading company. Hanwha just entered into an agreement with Honda to procure battery minerals for them. And so, one of the big changes we've seen in the market in the last 3 to 6 months is Japan has really woken up not just to graphite but battery minerals and the EV sector generally. So we see some real possibilities about adding some Japanese partners to our portfolio as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was going to ask you about some of those changing trends when you're talking to customers. It'd also be fascinating to hear what's the sentiment like, and I guess the advantage that you're seeing when you can present the PSG downstream rather than just going to these negotiations with just the feedstock of graphite.
Yeah, look, I think when we're selling the PSG, that allows us to go directly into the battery sector rather than have to rely on the refractory market or the industrial markets, which tend to grow more slowly and really don't have the supply gaps that are prevalent in the battery sector. By going to PSG rather than concentrate, we also skip the intermediate processors, all of whom are in China, and we can go directly to large anode producers, and even the Chinese anode producers are mega companies that can support the new development like us. And then I guess the added benefit is we see ourselves as being quite competitive at the mine site in producing a graphite concentrate, but we really believe we can be an industry leader in cost, particularly outside of China on purified spherical graphite. And that seems to be the limiting factor for a lot of the anode customers. So we think it puts us in a very good competitive position.
For sure. And I did want to ask you as well, it's been littered throughout the conversation, but what was that graphite market outlook that you and the company have moving forward? Obviously fairly strong, but would love to, yeah, just hear you put that into words.
Yeah. We're extremely bullish on the graphite price, and we're starting to see it. Like when we did our 2019 study, I think we were looking at flake prices of sort of around the $600 range at the time, and we were projecting major increases, right? But we hadn't seen that yet. But now we have. Now that flake is selling for nearly 800 a ton. The purified spherical graphite is selling for 32, 34, 3600 a ton. And what we're hearing is those prices are going up higher in the short term. So if you start to forecast that price, we just see a major supply gap, and we feel like we have a really good understanding of what the cost structure is, and the single largest component cost in the production of purified spherical graphite is the graphite concentrate that goes into it. So if we're able to produce a graphite concentrate at a low cost, then we're going to be able to pass that down to the downstream operation. And if you consider other startup operations, and we're going to need a lot, like we're not the only ones who are going to be producing this product moving in the future, the incentive price to do that is only going to go increasingly high. So when we look at the future prices of graphite and where they're going to go, what's going to happen? Well, we certainly think it's going to go much higher than it is right now. And again, I'll use the lithium market as something of an analogy in that the market grew faster than the ability of the upstream to meet the demand. And we're seeing exactly the same thing happening in graphite right now. And the first sign of that is what we're seeing in China, where they're increasingly importing larger amounts of graphite flake into China, and they're making less purified spherical graphite available to overseas customers. And when we start to look at some of the expansions that people have planned for electric vehicles and gigafactories, you're going to need significantly larger amounts of anode, and that can only have a really positive impact on purified spherical graphite for companies like us.
There's plenty to watch and a lot of exciting trends at the macro level for the graphite sector and for Renascor as well. As we head into the back end of 2022, any final reflections for those longer term shareholders of ASX RNU, for those potentially looking at the Renascor story now?
Yeah, look, I think that we're only seeing the start of an upward trend in graphite. We've already seen it happen in lithium. We're starting to see it happen in some other battery minerals. And that can only mean a really positive trend for companies involved in this space. And I guess the key thing maybe to highlight is while China has dominated the market for batteries in general, we're starting to see major expansions in terms of numbers in North America and in Europe. And for companies who are able to provide raw materials and then processed raw materials from jurisdictions really outside of China to feed those markets, I think the outlook looks particularly strong. And really, we see ourselves as being one of amongst a number of companies involved in the sector, and based on our price pressure on graphite, really one that can compete at a strong competitive cost advantage. So really some great upward trajectory from where we're going moving forward.
That is the Renascor Resources story. It's ASX RNU. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to share it out. Don't forget to hit the like button. Make sure you've subscribed and turn your bell notifications on. It's David Christensen. It's always a pleasure. Look forward to chatting again soon, mate.